Welcome everyone to the Fountaindale Public Library Genealogy Day. My name is Deborah Dudak, the head of Adult and Teen Services. Kicking off our Genealogy Day program this morning is using DNA testing for ancestry and family tree research with Robert Sliwinski. If everyone would please give him a warm round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you. Feels like I'm walking the stage for The Price is Right. I appreciate your attendance, and I'm going to give you an overview about the basics of genetic genealogy. There won't be too many criminals involved in the presentation, maybe one. So I want to at least say thank you again. My name is Robert Sliwinski. I'm a biologist and genetic genealogist. I drove up from the Indianapolis area today. I used to live in the Chicago area. But I've given a number of presentations about this and attended a number of conferences, written some publications, and do consulting for people who have interest in their DNA results and want to have an explanation about what to do with those results. So let's proceed here. Yeah, so this is me. Giving a presentation over near Detroit. Large screen over there, was very nice. Also what I do is prepare reports for people that go through their DNA results and give information about surnames and depending on what type of testing they've done, provide very technical but very easy to understand language so it makes sense of all the money that they spent on their DNA tests. This basically, anytime you do any kind of genealogical research and or DNA testing, you're trying to find relatives in some way or find out more about your genetic background, the genetic group you belong to, what type of migration paths your ancestors went through. My first start at doing genetic testing was to basically try to find more family. My family tree isn't as large as I would like it to be. It does not go back to the 1600s. It goes back to the mid-1800s, which is really not that far back. But what happens is I come from a Polish family that immigrated to the United States back in the 1960s, and their ancestors and relatives back then weren't so much concerned about maintaining records. They were more maintaining their lives, essentially, having lived through World War II. This is my father and my mother. He did well. So, and my aunt. This is my grandmother, great-grandmother, and great-aunt as well. You'll see these pictures up again. But the idea is essentially that I wanted to find out more information about my ancestry. So I did take the Y-DNA test. We'll talk more about that later as well. The mtDNA test, which is the mitochondrial DNA test. And an autosomal test, which I call the cousins test, or family finder, or relative finder, depending on what company you choose. So I do have some photographs of the family, but I went into more detail about my maternal side. I wanted to find out more about where my maternal roots come from. So that involves taking a mitochondrial DNA test. So when you take a test, how many people have taken a DNA test? Okay. How many people have not? I guess, okay. Oh, well, there we go, sizable number. One of the things that I wanted to find out is that there's a disconnect in my maternal family tree. My great-grandmother comes from a very small town in Poland, and past that I couldn't get any information. And a lot of times things online as far as getting records was very weak. The Polish Catholic Church tended to be a little bit more not so happy with providing records to anybody outside the church that would be cataloging them and putting them online. That has been relaxed quite much more recently, so I've been able to find some records. But I did a study essentially on people that were matches to me on my maternal side. The maternal line is just one long, thin part of your family tree. It starts with you, your mother, your mother's mother, mother's mother's mother. So because it comes down, it does not include your grandfather's mother at all. It's one long, thin ribbon that goes along one side of the branch. And I'll show a diagram that explains that. But I wanted to discuss something with my matches that I had. They were close. They weren't exact matches, but they were close. When you look at ancestral DNA results, basically what happens is that you get an exact match, a one-step match, 2 steps, and 3 steps. And past that is a number of steps further. An exact match means you have someone on your maternal line that you have a direct ancestor, a common ancestor with, but that common ancestor may be up to 900 years ago. Well, that kind of blows the whole genealogical research thing unless you're royalty. So my matches were 1, 2, and 3 steps away. And I wanted to find out how were they possibly linked to me and in what time frame. I did some research on doing calculations for the time to most common recent ancestor. And I was able to come up with things that were very interesting as far as timelines. But I wanted you to take a look at these photographs up here, which you've already had a couple of minutes to take a look at. And I wanted to see, do you see any similarities within the faces of these people?
White.
Correct. That's a good start. I've never heard that one before, but everybody's a comedian here. Yes.
The lady at the bottom of family A, and then the left-hand side of family B. The features.
Yes.
Yeah.
Are you starting to? Now be careful about the nose. The nose is something that can change during generations. You've probably seen in family photographs. But one of the things that I think is very striking are the cheekbones and the bones around the eye that are very striking. I asked my matches to send family photographs, the maternal line, to see if there's any potential association by characteristics, looks, or is there anything that is passed down in the family? Now, not every photograph is going to have. These are the ones that I feel that potentially have some potential for matching up. The thing is, can we figure out who's more closely related than the other? I told you that there's some that are a step or 2 or 3 away. But I do, the very first person to ever mention that there's a connection between these 2 people. Yeah. That family A is my family, and the rest of the families, family B, okay, so we have an Eastern European origin, Northern Ireland origin, unknown, adopted, Eastern European origin as well. So you see that family A and family B. I'm gonna take a little time with this one because one of my things that I was thinking of, I have a degree in biology, but I also have a degree in art. So I know, both brains are working at the same time. So what I wanted to do was see, is there a human side to genetic genealogy? Is there something we can look at and say, you know, there's a strong family resemblance somewhere here? So do you see any resemblances between family A and family C? What parts of the face do you see resemblances?
On family C, the 2 women, the back person is more resemblance to the family A.
Mm-hmm. This person here?
Yes.
Good. What about her? Her? Okay. Notice that there's differences in how people look, even though these 2 ladies are sisters. And so you have genetics plays a role in how they look. These ladies here, this lady is a dean at Iowa State University. She and her sister are a step 2 match from me. We have step 3, step 2, and these two are an exact match, but she doesn't know where she's from, essentially. Which means that they have a common ancestor within a shorter amount of time than myself and I. So myself and any of these families over here. So I wanted to make sure that it's very evident to you, because some people don't see it right away, some people do. I have to start pointing things out. But what it gives you is an idea is that I wrote a paper on this, basically provided, it was like for the group of people that were involved in this, kind of giving them a timeline of what potentially we had a common ancestor. And for family C and family A, estimated that our families probably were separated about the 1700s. There was a whole bunch of partitioning of Poland back then, and families were split up because of new borders that were created. So the family D and family C are working together to figure out where they had a possible common ancestor, and family B didn't really think there was that much physical commonality, even though you're seeing it and I saw it as well. I think it's all perceptional. But what I did read on a number of articles is that humans are really good at looking at photographs and identifying relatives. That, oh, you look like, Cousin Jerry, or things like that. So, yes?
The lady on the right on family B looks like the one in family D, and the one in family D looks like the one in family C on the right, very right.
Mm-hmm.
The mouth, the chin, all that.
There's a lot of commonalities in that.
Family C is definitely related to family B.
To family B?
To family B.
Okay. Family C, they're still 2 steps away at that point. There is a common ancestor way back several hundred years ago. It's going to be very difficult to try to figure that out. And one of the things you're probably going to say, well, Robert, that's great. You found a bunch of information that's kind of useless. But, we've connected at that point. We do know we have a common ancestor somewhere back in the line. Maybe someday we'll figure it out as far as who that person is. Family C has their records back to I believe, the mid-1700s. So I'm still trying to chase back to get to that point where she is at, and hopefully to help family D out as well. So, but what's interesting is I'll show you some my results from my DNA testing that gives you an idea what to expect. But one of the things that recently came up, there was a change in what's called an algorithm, the way they review the DNA and how they map where your ancestral origins are. And for a long time, mine was Eastern Europe. The recent change has shown up something different that might be interesting why family B is related to me. On the next Maury Povich. Okay, one of the things that I wanted to find out a little bit more about my Sliwinski surname. What are these? Plums. My last name means from the place of plum orchards. Sliwinski. Yes, it's funny because I absolutely adore plums, prunes, things like that. And every Sliwinski that I've ever met, I've asked them, do you like plums and prunes? I love them. So it's a confusing thing. I don't know. That's probably why we were named after that, because we hung out in plum orchards, probably stealing fruit and stuff like that. So what I did is I started a Sliwinski surname project at FamilyTreeDNA. I'm a volunteer administrator at FamilyTreeDNA to do a project administration for the Sliwinski surname project, the Germanic and Viking project, as well as the mitochondrial H2 project. That's a subgroup of a genetic group, H2. And let me see. So I have a bunch of people that I wanted to find out information about. A gentleman in Australia who is a Sliwinski started this. Apparently there are a whole bunch of different Sliwinskis all over the world. Argentina, Australia, in Poland, of course, the United States, and a couple of other countries as well. So what this gentleman did is, as soon as I showed any interest whatsoever in the page, he turned it over to me. So I'm like, okay, running away screaming, I'm sure. What I did is I enhanced the page a little bit, and I said, hey, I bought some DNA kits. I got a good price on some DNA kits. Let's do some Sliwinski testing. Let's see how we're related. There was a lot of crickets playing for a long time, but there were a number of people that decided to say, hey, I'm willing to try. I had a Sliwinski from England try, and mostly from the United States that were interested in things like that. So there's Y-DNA results that look like a bunch of numbers and letters up there that mean absolutely nothing. I wanted to just take a second to talk about what these numbers mean. Do you see, are these clear enough? This is a 13 over here, 24, 15. Okay, each of these is a location on your Y-DNA. Think of it as your atlas, street atlas, and that you are basically going to each address of your friends and neighbors, and again, each house has an address. Each marker on your DNA has an address. It's a marker number, essentially, whether it's 191 or something like that. Each one of these will have a value, and that value is the number of repetitions of a genetic code. So if it's a CCTAG, you'll have that repetition 13 times at this location. And if you see a lot of people have that same thing, 13 across the board, 24 and 15. Now, there are in some places that there are mutations or changes that happen much faster than others. There are conservative markers that mutate very slowly. That means they stay constant for generations after generations. And some will mutate every couple of generations. And so what we do is we look at the number of differences between men in this sense, and then we'll find out basically there's a potential common ancestor based on the number of changes over time. For a Smith family, I found that there was one change in their Y-DNA for the ones that were sampled every 200 years. So we were, because the two Smiths that I was looking at, compared them, had a very good family tree, I was able to go back many generations to find their common ancestor and then determine that there was one difference between the two matches and come up with a mutation rate for that. It's not the same for every family. So that kind of gives an idea. Enough about numbers. Let's show more pictures. Okay, there we go. So we had a number of Sliwinskis show up, and they did their tests, and the results were interesting because Richard Sliwinski was grouped in genetic group I2A, which is the Southern Europeans. Arthur, Robbie, and Paul. So Richard is from the East Coast, Arthur's from Australia, Robbie's from New York area, Paul is from like the South Carolina area. These guys were grouped into the genetic group I1A, which is the Nordic Vikings. So they're yeah. So each of these maps below kind of show an area, the general area where the genetic haplogroup for the males are from. So the Southern Europeans essentially are from Southern Europe. This is the boxes around the area that is, as it was at one point, some borders around Poland. The Nordic Vikings, of course, have a potential homeland from the Scandinavian area with some influence going down into Eastern Europe as well. And the R1A group, which is I'm part of, as far as Robbie from Chicago, Stefan from England, and myself from the Chicago area, compose the R1A group, which is the Indo-Europeans. The genetic group is very widespread, not only covers Europe, but goes all the way into India as well. I have a story about that. I don't know if I have time to talk about that. But so we found out that there were 3 genetic groups associated with that. There are about 13 male genetic groups. And that none of these people in each of these groups, the subgroups, were closely related to each other at all, which I thought was a little bit surprising, because I was hoping to find that there would be some cousin or something like that. And I looked between each person, and they even weren't very closely related to each other, which means that there are a lot of branches out there that just have diverged over time. Now, it means that these guys here in genetic group I1A do have a common ancestor, perhaps 40,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago, and Richard's by himself for now. So he doesn't look too sad, though. Okay, so why do you test your DNA? If you want to know about your geographical origins and genetic groups, if you want to learn about how genetic groups moved around the world, to provide insight about your deep ancestral history. Now that's good for like coffee talk, things like that. I got a great book about, my genetic history, all the migrations of my people and things like that. But a lot of you here are here for genealogical research. And how do you use the DNA testing to help you break down those brick walls that potentially, everybody has a couple of them in their research. Basically, you do that to assist you with your family tree, to compare your surnames to others of the same surname, to potentially break down some brick walls in your research. So let's go on to what lineages are followed with Y DNA. Y DNA is the Y chromosome, which makes men men. The mtDNA, and I'll go over where these are found as well, is the maternal line, and the autosomal is basically all lines that come together that make you. So the Y DNA line is the red boxes, and you see it's one linear lineage on this. It does not include a grandfather or great-grandfather from the mother's side. So men are the boxes, ladies are the triangles, and that this is mitochondrial DNA that is inherited from the mother and this mother here, right here. So female lineage follows the mitochondrial DNA, goes up just one long, thin line. Male line this side, female line this side, and the entire thing coming into these, for these two people, is the autosomal DNA when you take a test. So if you go to Family Tree DNA, AncestryDNA, or 23andMe, majority of the time you're just getting a autosomal test. That's the general family finder, relative finder test. Unless you go to a specific company like Family Tree DNA to do the Y DNA, which can only be done by men because they have the Y chromosome. And also, if you are to do a maternal line test, you as a man or woman can do that as well. Let's go into this is the test kit from Family Tree DNA. Is essentially a swab. For those who don't know that, basically you're rubbing the inside of your cheek. The inside of your cheek has cell linings that slough off hourly, essentially, and it refreshes itself. So basically what you can do is you're taking the cells off of that, you put it in a vial that has some, like a preservative, and then send it back. And then within several weeks, you get your results back. What they do is they take those cells and they force those cells to go through mitosis to basically generate the chromosomes. And they take that DNA out, and they basically then run it through. They can run it through a machine now that reads the base pairs on there. You get 2 vials, and the reason you get 2 vials, they used to have 3, is that for some reason, if there's some inconclusive results, they can run the test over again without having to ask you for an additional sample. And or basically, if you want a different test done, you have genetic material that is left over. Typically what they've done is for a long time they said that they will maintain that in storage for about 25 years, or you can request that they destroy the sample. By the way, they can't clone you. Even if you think you're awesome and you would like a twin, they can't do it. Yeah. So the DNA that is tested, we talk about that. So Y chromosome is found in the nucleus of the cell. So this is a cell. Think of it as basically a yolk, an egg, sunny side up in the frying pan. Are you getting hungry? So in the nucleus, which is basically what looks like the yolk essentially, is where the Y chromosome is, and all the autosomal DNA is there. The mitochondrial DNA is out in the cytoplasm. The mitochondria are the power plants of the cell. They take in the energy what you take in as food, and they take that food and they turn it into energy for your body. Mitochondria and mitochondrial DNA are the most common DNA found in the body. In fact, they've been able to extract that from ancient remains thousands of years old. And that's the easiest one to get because there's so much of it as compared to the Y DNA. Okay, so how does Y DNA basically follow the generations or get transferred with the generations? So this is my grandfather, Alexander, my father, Tadeusz, and myself. And so that basically is the one lineage. Instead of just saying boxes, you actually have photos of people that actually provided that genetic material through the generations. Again, the Y DNA is found in the nucleus. Mitochondrial DNA is passed down from generation to generation, from Polina Majewska to Wanna Kwaśniewska. And by the way, if it was a male, it'd be a Majewski. They feminized the names in Poland so that we have an A at the end rather than an I. To my grandmother, Wanda, to my mother, Apollonia, which is interesting because you saw that previous picture in the beginning, my mom had like blonde hair. She said this is the only time in her life that she ever had dark hair. And she's like, why did you take that picture to use on this? I'm like, this is the picture I liked, and it was a good picture. So the interesting thing about mitochondrial DNA is it's found outside the nucleus, and it is a piece of DNA that is in the shape of a ring. Not a perfect ring or anything like that, but that's what the representation is. It is 16,569 base pairs long, all the way around. That's it. Your regular chromosome have millions of base pairs of DNA. This essentially, they normally test the HVR1, which is the hypervariable region 1 and hypervariable region 2. I don't know, maybe someone was hyper when they did name these things. But these are two areas that only are 500 base pairs each. And these are the areas that have the most change that occurs within the DNA, within that type of DNA. That could be used for determining ancestry and connections between people. The rest of this is the coding region that codes for metabolic things in your DNA. And there are a lot of mutations that happen in the hypervariable regions, but very few that happen in the coding regions. The coding region is an area where you don't want to have a lot of change because that could lead to genetic disorders that could lead to death, essentially. So these kind of weed themselves out over time. Majority of the times, very few people have problems with the coding region. This then is the full genetic sequence for the mitochondrial DNA. Majority of the changes you'll see will be in these hypervariable regions 1 and 2. And we'll go talk about the tests and what you get for your money, essentially. So I'm going to go over the different DNA testing companies. Who's tested with Family Tree DNA? Okay, great. How about 23andMe? Number of people. How about AncestryDNA? A lot more people are. Boy, I tell you, when they started offering that a lot of people, and I know the reason why. Ancestry has the best genealogical database. And so if they have a bunch of people that are also testing as well, you can start doing matching up with that. I'm going to go over the 3 different companies just in case you don't know about the other ones as well, and what my results were on that to give you an idea of what you're getting for your money. Let's start off with Family Tree DNA. Essentially, there's new pricing that's happening. In fact, they had a sale just recently. And they're going to have another, I think they're having a sale right now for Mother's Day as well. But it is a company that is based in Texas. I've gone to a couple of their conferences that they talk about the new techniques that administrators can use to help their people that are tested in their groups. And it is a company that does the Y-DNA testing, the mitochondrial DNA testing, and the autosomal testing as well. So one of the things that they do in most last couple years is decided that not only for your autosomal test or your family finder test to give you an idea of who your matches are, but they also wanted to give you a potential indication of your genetic origins, geographically speaking. Mine came out to be 100% European and pretty much 100% Eastern European. There was a Sliwinski that is in my project, contacted me. He's a volunteer administrator for the Viking Project because he's I1, which is like, and a kickboxer, by the way, too. So he said, hey, Rob, I've never seen anybody that just has one geographic origin. Normally people have a little bit of Southern European, a little bit of Northwestern European, Mediterranean, and African, and whatever. He goes, Rob, I think you must be a thoroughbred. I said, I don't know, maybe an inbred, but it's interesting. We'll go on into some detail about what the family tree DNA has. They changed their algorithms. Are they refining who you are, basically, based on your genetics? And so this is my origins, and some of these are actually the matches that I have and their geographic origins of people that are potentially my relatives. But they updated that and revised my origins. And what's interesting, it's a little bit washed out over here, but it's still very strong. Eastern European, 98%. And then I have trace results of South American and British Isles. Okay, the British Isles one doesn't throw me so much because remember I have that Northern Irish potential connection, which could be associated with here. That would be on my maternal line. I belong to the haplogroup H2A2A1. Okay. That was the first genetic group that was, back in 1981. Y'all remember those days? Yeah. There was the first full sequence of mitochondrial DNA was completed. And it was completed by Dr. Anderson. And he used the DNA from a lady that was in England, and that she was H2A2A1. That was the sequence that was used to compare it to all other sequences worldwide. And they basically have changed that to a different sequence now that is more African-based or has more relevancy to the rest of the world now than having a European-based one. But I am somehow directly related to this woman from England who had the first mitochondrial DNA sequence. And so it doesn't surprise me, but the question, you'll see my results from my mitochondrial DNA, how I have very strong, Polish background, but there might be something else going on that we just don't know about at this point. So the other thing that the family tree DNA does is provide you with an ancient European origins. This is something new that they're providing. And down in Frankfort, Indiana, I had a number of people that had their DNA tests done, and I reviewed their results. And a majority of them have very similar results regarding the ancient or European origins. So I have 13% Middle Age invader, 36% farmer, 50% hunter-gatherer, and 0% non-European. These are based on ancient remains, essentially, and dig sites around Europe and anywhere else that they have ancient remains where they've done DNA results on. So majority of people have very similar percentages that I've seen one after another after another. Let's look at the Y-DNA results. Again, family tree DNA. These are paternal matches at 12 markers. The 12-marker test doesn't exist anymore. I wanted to bring this up to show. The reason they did that is because if 12 markers is such a small amount of DNA that they look at, they really doesn't give you a clue who you're really related to. Anybody basically that is at 12 markers is a mismatch by one, you're not even closely related to at all. But if you have perfect exact matches, which are in red, it shows people anywhere from the United Kingdom to Romania down to Pakistan and one steps down in India. This shows basically the generality of where R1A, the Indo-Europeans, is found. So that is a very generalistic view of my matches, which really doesn't give me an idea. Now, even if you contacted every single one of them, let's compare genealogical notes. You'll be doing this for a very long time because they might come into quick dead ends because of the fact that they don't have enough information. So they have 12 marker, 25 marker, 37 marker, 67 markers, and 111 markers. When, let's say the least amount of markers you should get is 37 for men, and to find out their paternal ancestry essentially. Then you can, if you have a match at 37 markers, upgrade to 67 markers, see if that still holds true, because it may not. And if you still match at 67 markers, go up to 111 if you need to, or if you want to, because that'll give you an idea how much more, you'll be able to refine that time to most recent common ancestor. But usually 67 markers is pretty much enough. Then you start comparing your ancestry notes. So these are my matches at 25 markers. You see that there's a lot less all of a sudden, and they're not exact matches either. They're 2 steps away, or 1 step away and 2 steps away, and they're pretty much all over eastern and part of Central Europe over there. So the 25 marker test doesn't give me an idea what's going on. At some point my matches fizzle out. For a long time at 67 markers or 37 markers, I didn't have any matches until a couple years ago. And most of those matches, just the 1 or 2 that I had, were coming from the Ukraine. And Poland is right here, Ukraine is right here. The area that the families were saying their relatives were from was in this area. Now back in the 1700s, Poland was this big. It's going down to the Black Sea, from the Baltic to the Black, essentially. And so it wouldn't be unreasonable for that to be happening. What was also very interesting about that is that on the Sliwinski Foundation Facebook page, a gentleman contacted me and said he was a Perez, but he says his mother was a Sliwinski. And they said that they lived in Argentina, but her mother's side was from Poland. Actually, no, from Ukraine. So I'm like, okay, I'm starting getting Ukrainian results, and I'm still trying to convince them to do a DNA test. But I did ask to say, like, remember the family photos? You do a comparison to see if you're related. I looked at other Sliwinskis and like, nope, they don't even look like they're even closely related to my family at all. I got pictures back of the lady Sliwinski and her brothers, and her uncles look just like my dad. And I was like, you gotta be kidding me. I said, like, so I've been working on it's been 2 years now. We've been corresponding back and forth. We've been trading some historical paperwork regarding our families. I still need to try to convince them to do a DNA test, but if we get an exact match or really close match, I'm going to Argentina for vacation. So to reunite with family that was lost, essentially. Let me see now. I mentioned that I'm H2A2A1. That is a genetic group that was thought to have come from Central Asia and migrated east and west. So this is the HVR1 that I mentioned before, and each of these is a location on that mitochondrial DNA. I don't have to go into much more detail about that, but these are the mutations that are associated with that one and this one, and these are the changes in the coding compared to a reference sequence. The reference sequence is much more ancient than mine, because it's considered to be around some 20,000 years old. Oh, the other thing is that there is a number. I have an NCBI number up the top. This is a number that my genetic sequence was put into a database that geneticists used to come up with the more recent revised genetic sequence that they base all different sequences, mitochondrial sequences around the world. And so mine was part of a study of some 3,000 genetic sequences to evaluate how to create the new one, the new sequence. So that was my number that was associated with the published paper that changed the whole face of mitochondrial genetics. It was really cool to be part of that. Okay, my maternal line. Now, wow, I'm related to everybody. This is HVR1, hypervariable region 1. It is the basic test that you could say. You could see right now that I'd never get through that to figure out who's my relative or not. But it kind of gives you an idea, like I have potential connections all over the eastern part of the United States, a little bit of down in Central America, a lot of European, one in Africa, a couple in Australia, Afghanistan, and Russia. That gives me very little information to work with. What happens is that if you spend a little bit of money, you're going to get too much information. Very interesting, huh? But let's go on to HVR1 and 2, which is combined. And you see that the matches start slimming down quite a bit. But this is my maternal line again. This is me in the white. These are my matches. These are exact matches, HVR1 and 2. That's why I contacted those other families in the previous photos that you saw, because they were matches of HVR1 and 2, and we did a full genetic test as well. This gives you an idea that for some reason that my maternal line seems to be more this way than this way. Does that pretty much make sense to you? I went up to the full genetic sequence and found out that these are, no exact matches, but in the 2, 3-step, 4-step range. There's a lot in Northern Europe, Scandinavia, and the United Kingdom. So even in Northern Ireland as a 3-step match, which is, I think that is my match, Anderson match. The interesting thing about this is that it gives you an idea potentially where your maternal origins may have come from. Now, globally looking at this, it's pretty much Northern Europe. But looking at trying to figure out who that person might be that is your ancestor, where do they come from? What's the best guess is that they're so spread out at this point. During the study that I did on my maternal side, I came up with some timelines. And the timeline to the 3-step was probably about in the 1500s. And I'm not going to get any records from that. But my thing was, how does someone that I think the maternal line comes from Eastern Europe end up in Northern Ireland? I'm sorry?
Well, all the medieval wars during that time and raping and pillaging that went on.
Well, unless the women were brought along with them,
Well, and weren't they taken as?
may have been taken as slaves and something like that. That would be even preceding the 1500s that I was talking about. But what I was looking at is that, this is my other closer match over here. We're just getting closer to the coast over here. There was no direct relationship between Northern Ireland and Eastern Europe at that time. But there was one between England and Poland at that time. There was grain trade in the 1500s. And I was, potentially there is a chance that there may have been grain trade, someone either from, now I was initially thinking it was coming from east to west, but there's also a good chance that it may have come from west to east and relocated over there as far as part of the merchant trade. But how does someone get from here, to here to here? Well, back in the 1500s, there were plantations that were created in Northern Ireland that basically took people from England and replaced them into Northern Ireland as far as the plantations were concerned. And so I asked the person who was there, did they think that actually they came from the United Kingdom? And they weren't quite sure, but I did ask, was the religion Protestant or Catholic at that point? They said they were not Catholic. So there's a good chance that they were repatriated over into Northern Ireland as part of the plantations. That would be one way of trying to do that. Is it 100% accurate? No, it's basically based on what is happening within a certain time frame, what historical events happen at that point that provide something when you don't have, when it's that far back you can't quite grasp anything. Let's go to 23andMe. So 23andMe offers a very interesting service. Not only do they offer something in Ancestry, but they also offer health reports as well. I've had both of those things done. At one point, they were not separating the two, but because the FDA shut them down for a while, they had to separate that out and just do ancestry. And they've now been able to put back health service results as well. I don't look at or discuss health results at all. This is something that's personal, and it's up to you to have that. I'm actually glad that they separated it out, because some people don't want to know certain things. I want to know. And the funny thing is that I'll tell you a little bit of history about myself, is that all the things that I found out about my mother and father are things that I have that are potential risks associated with that have been passed down to me. So I was wondering, did they actually get my family's medical reports, and we're looking and saying, okay, we got to put this down. But apparently it's written in your genes at this point. So they've changed a little bit about their website now. So you can look at the ancestry reports and basically find out about your origins, your ancestry composition. It says for me 77.7% Eastern European. Haplogroups, my maternal is H2A2A, which is interesting because 23andMe also provides you with if you're male, your male haplogroup and female haplogroup. They don't do a full evaluation, but they provide you with a decent amount of information. And for women, also their maternal haplogroup as well. So if you wanted to find out like the cousins portions or the relatives portions that you have, and as well as maternal side women, ladies, you can do that. And I'll talk about actually transferring your information over to other databases, because the more databases that you're in, the more chance you have to find a relative. And I will talk also about finding relatives, what to do, because not everybody is happy. There are some grumpy people out there that have done their DNA, and they don't want to be contacted by anybody, especially money-grubbing relatives that they don't want to talk to. So the other thing about 23andMe is they provide you a little bit of Neanderthal ancestry.
Question.
Oh, my mom always said I slouched. So what are you talking about? Yes.
On the Neanderthal, the lower the number or higher the number, what's the?
Well, they used to give a number of percentages. Now they give us a different number. And so the high end was about 3%. My previous results were about 2.7. Okay. So we have an understanding. Okay. Okay. We'll talk later. Okay.
It's gotta be more.
Okay. Yeah. So for me, for some reason, I am 100% Robert Sliwinski, according to them. But I am 99% European and 0.1% East Asian and Native American. And you can stripe the Native American because that would be most likely East Asian. That would be potentially a small amount. That could have been probably what might have happened in Europe way back when. The invasion of the Mongols, yeah, which is, yeah. Oh, speaking of that, there was a gentleman that did a DNA test and found out he was a European guy, found out he was a direct descendant of Genghis Khan. Oh, he was not happy about that. So you can be surprised sometime with that. Okay, so the breakdown that they have of this 99% and 0.1% is have 11% Northwestern European, including a little bit of French and German, Scandinavian, Finnish, which is interesting, broadly Northwestern European, 8.2%. They use broadly just because they just don't know where. Southern European, a little bit Balkan, 2.8%. I think that's attributed to my mother's father's side. And broadly Southern European, about 1%. A tiny bit Ashkenazi Jewish that they're calling. This is the only database that says that. And another one, broadly European, is 7%. So they're still refining some things. It just gives you an idea what the potential, because everybody thinks they're a little bit mixed anyway, kind of gives you an idea. Now, I did have one client who has Eastern European, Polish background, and that as long as they've known forever. We did look at her autosomal results and her mitochondrial DNA results. When I came back with her autosomal results, my origins came back with Eastern European, yay, Middle Eastern. And she was like, what? Where did that come from? I'm like, so I dug into it. And her match on the maternal side was an exact match with the family. The maternal side came from Baghdad, Iraq. And she was just fascinated how exotic that could be, that she has a maternal line that potentially has come from there. Whether or not, and I always have to look at, did it come from Eastern Europe or did it come from the Middle East? Which way was the connection? I have a sneaking suspicion it may have been because the Iraqi connection was based on the fact that they were Jewish Iraqi. And a lot of those people were pushed out by the Iraqi citizens and government into exile outside the country, which may have been a reason why they may have traveled through southern to Eastern Europe. That's my supposition at this point. But her family was horrified at first until she explained what was going on and they had a better understanding. So knowledge is power. It gives you a sense of empowerment as well. Yes, sir?
How does that information initially get into your DNA way back?
The thing is that there's a lot of people that contribute to your DNA. So some of these things can only go back a certain number of generations, like the family finder, relative finder, which is the autosomal, that all the branches of the tree. That usually goes back about 4 or 5 generations where it's clear. And after that, it becomes distant and very fuzzy because there's so many more people. It starts getting exponentially the number of people that are contributing to your genetics. But for the male line and the female line, that stuff usually doesn't change very often through many generations. And so you can trace that back quite a bit back through time. Okay, let me see if I can get to. The other thing that they're doing now at 23andMe is they're giving me kind of an ancestry timeline, which is new. So they basically say from 1940 to 1910 it's Eastern European. But let's go back, let's take the Wayback Machine, to 1820. They're still like 4 or 5 generations back. We're talking about Balkan, French and German, Scandinavian, Ashkenazi Jewish, going back to the 1790s, and Finnish. I think this is a little bit incomplete as far as that, because I'm sure there's probably more Eastern European somewhere in there as well. The Balkan, I think, is probably along my grandfather's line on my mother's side. Their last name was Chopor, which is very, they're in southern Poland. The OR on the name is very Hungarian sounding. And so, but that's why they probably thrown the Balkan in there as well. French and German, not sure about that exactly. Although my uncle Zygmunt was born in France because they had attracted a number of Polish workers to come to France with the the revolution, the new revolution essentially in the early part of the 20th century, to get them to have, they had enough factory jobs, and they essentially imported a bunch of Polish people, including my grandmother and grandfather, over there to work, and he was born over there, so he's a French citizen. And all this stuff I'm not sure about just yet. This is, as I said, brand new that they're providing timelines. But what they're doing is they're saying, you know what, if you're doing research on something like that, you may want to check in these time frames to see if you might have these kind of ancestors. Check with your family tree if you go that far back. Okay, 23andMe also provides you with if you're male, both maternal and paternal groups. H2A2A, again, with the maternal group. And that basically they're saying that the age of the maternal group is about 26,000 years ago. And most regions heavy that are incorporated with that are Eastern Europe and the Near East. Whereas paternal groups for mine is basically about 27,000 years ago, found in Eastern Europe, Scandinavia, Southwestern Asia, and in India for that genetic group. Those are pretty generic terms as far as that. So when you can get more information by finding out where your branch is on that genetic tree. This is kind of a map of where H2A2A is. So it shows a heavy portion in Eastern Europe, Central Asia, even covers part of Northern Africa. It's a pretty widespread group. Now, there are other different genetic groups that are found more in Asia, and there's the groups that have actually traveled across Asia, the Bering Strait, down into North America and South America, that are the Native American Indians. So, okay, there is one criminal on here. Jesse James was haplogroup T2. I said there's a number of letters and numbers that they've affixed to these things. There was a gentleman, Brian Sykes, that came up with a book back in, I think, 2001, The Seven Daughters of Eve. Very good, well-written book, providing kind of insight about what the original founders of the genetic groups may have, how they might have lived. And what he's done is he provided, like, J, he names these like Jasmine. H is Helena. So you could see that A2, Eva Longoria, haplogroup C, which is a very Asian one, is Yo-Yo Ma. H is one of the most prevalent female genetic groups in Europe. Up to 40% of men and women are haplogroup H, and there's like some 76 different subgroups of that. But you see that you have Luke the Evangelist, Marie Antoinette, Napoleon Bonaparte, Prince Philip, and Susan Sarandon. Yeah. H2A1, Dr. Oz. H3, Jimmy Buffett, Warren Buffett. H4, so basically the maternal line is not the same. I haven't done them to see if the paternal line is the same or not. Mario Batali, it's J1. Katie Couric, Meryl Streep, Stephen Colbert, K. K2A2A is Mike Nichols, Desmond Tutu, L. Another one is Malcolm Gladwell, M. Christy Yamaguchi, T2 Jesse James. Henry Louis Gates Jr., you've probably seen some programs by him, is let me see where it is, T2B2. And Benjamin Franklin and Bono are haplogroup V. Some of those are basically based on their descendants on the maternal line, and they're inferred. They also have DNA relatives. How am I doing on time?
You've got about a half an hour.
Okay, that's good. DNA relatives. So they'll give you a list of relatives. Now, I could have done this with Family Tree DNA, but it goes over and over. Sometimes you see the same ones come over because a number of people have tested with multiple companies. But this is one from 23andMe, and they give you an idea of how much percent you have shared. And the numbers are tiny here, 0.96% shared 3 segments. And they're saying Constance Selleck is potentially a third to fourth cousin to me. Well, I've looked at a lot of these things, and I've contacted some have contacted me, and came up with one scenario where my maternal line comes from a town called Izdebki, Poland, very southeastern part of Poland. And there was this lady who, for some reason, is considered a fourth cousin, Marilyn Terrell, and she contacted me and said, "Hey, cousin, how are you doing?" I'm like, "Okay, great. Where do you have, ancestry from?" And I saw Izdebki, and I'm like, "My family is still there." And she goes, "Okay, I'll provide you with my family tree, and let's take a look and compare notes, right?" Oh, I got so excited. So Marilyn has her family, and the names have actually changed spelling over the time, but I was looking as far back as I possibly could to a Michael and Magdalena Fall. And I contacted my cousin Anna over in Poland, over in Izdebki. I said, "Do you have any in town?" It's a pretty small town. "People with the last name Fall." She goes, "Nope, not at all." I'm like, "Are you sure?" Because I have a direct connection with somebody who has that last name. "And is there anyone in our family that was married to a Fall at one point?" She goes, "No." I'm like, "Well, maybe let's say they weren't married to that person and they still had a kid. We're still looking for the evidence, but there's a pretty clear line that if I can find some records that have that surname on there, we can probably find the common ancestor." Okay, Neanderthal ancestry. they've changed it to percentage to the number of variants that you have. I have 295 variants. 76, this is more than 76% of the 23 more customers. Okay. Makes me rough around the edges, but I'm still a nice guy. So let's move on to AncestryDNA. I'm sure you've seen this one before. Funny thing about this, and then you're probably thinking at this time that what is going around, Rob? You're doing all this genetic testing. You haven't found any real relatives that you can say, yeah, that's yeah, right? Yeah. So we'll go around. I'll show you some success stories as well. Sometimes it's hit and miss depending on what's going on. But I got one on here that's a lead that I just found out. I mean, just like 2 or 3 weeks ago, found out about. They've revamped their site. They have an ethnicity estimate. They're still in the 95th percentile for being Eastern European, then 5 for other regions, and I'll go over the map as well. So you can pull your full ethnicity estimate. Then you have matches that come up as well. And then you can enter things called DNA circles where you can have interaction between people. There your matches. The ethnicity estimate for Robert Sliwinski is, again, no surprise, big of Eastern Europe. And then now we've got a little bit of what are they calling it here? Trace regions in Scandinavia, Western Europe, Finland, Northwestern Russia, and Ireland. Okay, we're finding some interesting information out there. So it may be that this is a very strong connection over here, or it could be Scandinavia. I'm not sure what my maternal line may be from. My mother had the amazing ice blue eyes I've ever seen. So who knows if she came from a Scandinavian background or not. I'm still working on that. But very solid, Eastern European background. They have a number of different locations around the globe that they look at the population, the genetics from each population, then they compare it to your genetics to find out what your ethnicity estimate is. So I have some results. I hadn't looked at this in a while, because I was usually looked at some other websites more often. And I came back to this and I said, okay, this is a new person on here. Confidence very high, 4th to 6th cousins. Doesn't really look like anybody in my family. But I'm like, okay, I'm going to take a look at that. He's got 149 people on his family tree. I'm like, okay, let's take a look and see what's going on to see if there's anything. And I'm looking at the family tree. I'm like, okay, and then all of a sudden I see a Veronica Sliwinski that pops up, born in 1857 in here. Well, my grandfather was born right about there. That's pretty close. Now, okay, you're saying, hey, he's got a good lead. Well, here's the other problem. There are 21,000 Sliwinskis in Poland. And so who knows, it's not a very uncommon name, but it's not a very common name either. So I've contacted this gentleman, and I'm still waiting to hear back. And here's the thing about contacting people. It is hit or miss. It depends on how you do it, because people they don't know who you are. You might have a DNA match, and they might think it's a good thing. They might think it's, oh yeah, they probably have the same traits as I do. So the idea is that you have to do it in a very diplomatic way. And what I've done for a number of clients is I've been the middleman and introduced myself as the genetic genealogist helping my client out, would like to contact you about that instead of having some person who is like, oh my God, you're my lost relative. Please contact me right away, blah, 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 blah. And then freaking out and never doing anything about it. So what I have had great success basically and being the middleman. I have a client right now from Australia, and she's trying to contact some people to try to find out about her baker line. And I contacted a baker who is in the United States, and basically was the go-between, and then let them come together and start having an email exchange. And they were all excited about talking to each other. They did not find a commonality on their baker name, but they did find some commonalities on some other surnames where they matched on. So, but the idea is that when you write the text for your email to contact this person, saying that you're basically doing research, that there is a potential for us to be related. Are you interested in comparing notes to determine if we are or not? And it would be great if you could respond. And basically, normally what I do is I say, look, this is who I am, this is what I do, this is where I'm from. I don't give an address, but at least tell them what town or city, state, essentially, that we're, so they're not freaked out about it. Because, the next time I get an email from Nigeria, I'll be like, okay, it's some other scam that's going to happen, But, and not to knock Nigeria, I'm sure it's a great country. So I've been trying to contact him because I want to find out, because he might not have much information about Veronica. But one of the things that I found out about my grandfather is that he had like 3 or 4 sisters. And he was born about my great-grandfather Carl was born about 1860, which is about the same time frame in that. And I don't know if he had sisters or brothers, still working on that information. But the funny thing is that I've got lots of relatives in Poland, and I keep on saying, hey, could you look up some information? No, Robert, nie mam czasu teraz. So I'm like, they don't have enough time to go look, for that information. So yeah, it's interesting is like a lot of people, they go to the other countries, they don't know anybody there, and they do all the research. And like, I have a bunch of people I know, and they don't want to do the research for me. But they did do some genetic testing, which is pretty kind of cool. I'm not going to talk about that today. Okay. We've got about, 20 minutes left, I think?
Yeah.
Which is enough time for questions and answers at that point. So I'm going to go through over DNA success story example. I have a client, Mr. Martin, and he was interested in finding out more about the Martin surname and who he was related to in that. And I said, okay, let's take a look at your autosomal testing. These are results from autosomal testing. And what I try to find out is that, okay, who are the closest relationships and have the Martin surname within their list of surnames for the match. So somewhere along their line, in their family tree, they have a Martin surname. This is what I was like, okay, we've got a couple of people, we're gonna find a Martin amongst those, that's gonna be a direct relation and be a great success story, and I'll be just so happy to provide this information to my client. By the way, I work with, you know CeCe Moore, who is in the DNA Detectives? Yeah, she's a friend of mine, and she sometimes feeds me a lot of stuff that's overflow from what she does. And she's a great speaker and does a lot of things. She's also on a number of the TV shows as the DNA consultant. So I believe this was probably one of those that came over from her. I also want to show you a little bit about what the chromosome, it's a browser essentially that provides you information about all your 22 chromosomes and your X chromosome, the 23rd one. What it'll do is it'll show you that these are areas or segments that you potentially have in common with that other person. And so you can actually trace, and there's a number of genetic genealogists that can actually tell you what segment they are from what family member. For those people who have extensive amounts of genetic testing in their family and a good family tree, they can be able to put those pieces together to say what relative they came from. In this instance, it's basically showing just what location on the chromosome, which chromosome they're located, to kind of give an idea that these are the biggest segments, essentially, that provide you with the most information about your match. That was a huge disappointment, though. See, I'm setting you up for all these disappointments, no family tree connection with the Martin surname. Only surname was used in that search. So for autosomal matches of Mr. Martin, I changed my approach and I said, okay, let's put in all the surnames that are in these family trees. And that was a mess. So I said, because I'm finding a bunch of it could be a bunch of Smiths, could be Browns in there, and all of a sudden I'm finding all these loose ends that are not going anywhere. So I went back to the family tree and I said, okay, let's not put all the names on the family tree. Let's put the ones that are directly related to that person, that direct connection along these lines. And I put in and basically said, I reran the match algorithm with very specific surnames that were in the family tree that were a direct genetic connection. We're not talking about like outliers or second, third cousins somewhere that aren't directly genetically related. But I came up with a common name of Brackbill as a surname that matched. And so basically the lessons learned, we'll look at that in a second here, but one of the lessons learned is do not limit your search to one surname, even though you want to do that. Because what you might do is that if you are a match, what's going to happen is that you might have matches along a different surname, which would lead you down a different line, but you might find a lot more interesting information along that line. You just have to go back later and check to see if there's any more matches for that original surname you were looking for. Check all matches on your autosomal, even if it's fifth and distant cousin. What's interesting about what the research that I've done is that all the ones that say they're like second, third cousin, I'm not finding that match on the family tree that connects the two. I'm finding more like the fourth, fifth, sixth, distant cousin. As long as your family tree can go back to the 1700s, then all of a sudden I'm finding a number of people that have matches at that point. Stacey once told me, she goes through all these surnames as she's going through the matches and looking and stuff like that. She has probably solved a whole bunch of mysteries for a bunch of people that aren't her clients, that she doesn't have even time to tell these people that she's found a common ancestor between two people as going through the records and things like that. So what you end up doing is you might find something you're not expecting, but it's a good thing, because if you can compare and increase your family tree somewhat by finding a new match, that's great. Let me see here. So we have one match that has a Francis Breckbill in their family tree, and Raymond Martin also has Francis Breckbill. And the thing is that you want to make sure that's not only just the same name, but they also have the same time range as well, and sometimes a little bit off. This is 1705 to 1756, 1702 to 756. This is the same person, though, that they have, and because they're married to the same gentleman, that has this similar time frame as, because some of these dates are off a little bit. But there is also descendants of that person that have the same names, and so I'm like, this is a pretty solid match. So Raymond Martin matches Linda Doty as far as that, back in the late 1600s to the early 1700s. This is a common ancestor that they both have. So I introduced that information to Mr. Martin to let him know that he does have a family connection with the Brackbills, and so he's able to contact those people and find out more information. And the other thing is that I did actually find a little bit later a connection with a Martin family that was it was interesting. I found this in a roundabout way. I contacted this Martin potential relative, and he said, "Oh yeah, we're related." I'm like, "Okay, how come they don't know?" But he goes, "I'm a genetic genealogist too, and I've written a whole bunch of papers about the Martin family, and that gave this Martin family that I was helping a whole bunch of new family tree information that they didn't even know about before." So you see what I have. The other one is there's another person that matched Mr. Martin, and turns out that they also had Pat and Raymond also had Frances Breckbill as their common ancestor. So she is this family here, John, her, and Frances, are very much like founders for a number of people in that family. So I used to have a website, but I decided that it wasn't the best idea. I thought that social media might be a little better, so my information is on Facebook and under DNA Explorers. And so eventually, if you like it, you can then post your questions or things like that, and or see updates about what I'm doing. And one of the things that I usually do is I take a picture while I'm up here. Hold on. And I've had a number of people from Rotary clubs and things like that wave in the background. Hello. I'll post it on Facebook. None of your names will be on there. Don't worry about it. So that's my presentation. I hope to probably give you a little bit of insight about some of the DNA testing companies, some of the tests that are there, and that how some of the results may look. Now, your results may differ because of your genetics, but it's a very interesting process, and hopefully provide some insight that there are ways to understand this, because when you get it at first, the result is like a bunch of letters and numbers and all these numbers here, and like, what does this all mean? That's the things that I can help you out with.
So
Yes.
let's take questions, and when we take questions, our presenter, for the sake of our webinar users, he's going to try to repeat the question. So I know that he's like, oh, I have this thing. Like, our poor webinar people cannot hear without Robert or I speaking the questions. So let's take some questions. Mr. Baker?
The Y-DNA has, the Y test has 12, 25, 37, et cetera. Do the autosomal and mito have different levels also?
Yeah, Y-DNA having different levels, do the other tests have different levels as well? The mtDNA has the HVR1, HVR2, so it's the a basic, advanced, and then the full genetic sequence you can do. So it depends on how much you want to spend on there. Typically, at a start, you should want to do the advanced test, and then honestly, if you do the full genetic sequence, it'll be the last mitochondrial DNA test you need to do. One of the things I learned about my mitochondria is that I do have what's called, can't remember what it's called, but where two different types of results shadow each other, essentially. And what happens is that you get a mix of one mitochondrial DNA and another one. So mine is in flux. So that there's a mutation going on within my generation that's happening in my mtDNA, which does not get passed down to my children. So it was passed down from my mother. Yeah, for the Y-DNA, there are very few testing companies that do that right now. They switched to autosomal. And so a lot of people because before it used to be like, well, you couldn't find any relatives because the DNA mixed up so much. But now the fact that they've been able to split up into blocks of DNA, they've been able to find matches more readily. Yes, going back.
With the 23andMe, if you're female, are you able to tell which haplogroup for your male and female?
If you're female and you test with 23andMe, can you find out your male haplogroup? No, not if you test, but if you have a brother, father, or cousin along that male line test, then they'll get that result. They also get the mtDNA result as well for themselves. Yes, sir.
Success story. I had a brick wall of an ancestor back in 1789. I did my Y-DNA test, and I ended up matching people that have verified, family trees that went back to the first crow that came across to Boston in 1635. So now I can work both forward and backwards, trying to link to the two.
Thank you for that success story. Yes, back in the back.
What would you recommend for a person that does not know his paternal side, not even his father, to get any kind of matches?
What type of testing would someone have to do to find out about their paternal side when they have no paternal people to test? That's when you take an autosomal test, and you need to then circle around to see if you can find a match on potentially finding. You can do is you take the test, the autosomal test yourself, and you get your mother to test that, so you can find out which side is your maternal side, the DNA that you've gotten, and which side is your paternal. So if you,
Mother's deceased.
okay, so you take your DNA test essentially, and then see if you can coordinate with people that are your matches to find out.
This would be my husband, though.
Okay, well actually, then he would actually just do a Y-DNA test if it's just your husband.
Okay, why?
Yeah, Y-DNA test to find out his paternal line. Then look at matches to find out if they have any common ancestors.
And AncestryDNA will do that, right?
No.
Okay.
The only the testing companies that do that Y-DNA right now are Family Tree DNA and MyHeritage.
Okay, thank you.
I didn't talk about MyHeritage. I haven't tested with them yet, but they're an up-and-coming testing company right now.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry.
I'll get back to the people there again.
On the thought of mutation, like Darwin's theories and that, and we talk about you can see it in the DNA and that.
Mm-hmm.
Is it really that marked? What is it showing up as a mutation is the question, I guess.
What are mutations essentially, and are they influential on your DNA? Is that okay? Mutations, pretty much for the most part, especially on segments that repeat over and over again, are pretty much benign. there are certain locations on the your chromosomes and your DNA where mutations could change things. Genes are turned on, turned off as you live throughout your life, and they also can express different characteristics. But what happens in the genetics that you're looking at right now, a mutation typically is the way geneticists look at to see the differences between two different people. And they're looking at they're logging that as ways to determine differences, and also to put people on different groups and different branches of the family, of the genetic family tree. So majority of mutations that you see, the thing is that there's a common use of the word mutation as being bad, where mutation in genetics is basically just change, a difference between one base pair and another base pair as it changes over time. The interesting thing about DNA is that there is always some sort of change that happens because it copies itself. And anytime you have like a Xerox copy that you put on a piece of paper down, you start Xeroxing that piece of paper in the town, it starts changing the way it looks over several generations. So that's what's happening, is there's a change that happens over several generations, or in multiple generations that it happens. But typically most changes or mutations that happen in the DNA, especially for ancestry, are pretty much benign. Yes?
You had said something about uploading your test results. Is that to GEDmatch? And
You can upload your results to GEDmatch. GEDmatch is something I would do more in like an advanced presentation. But you can take your, let's say, AncestryDNA results, your 23andMe results as well, and upload those to FamilyTreeDNA. And MyHeritage now is doing that. You can take those results and take them over to MyHeritage. But what you do essentially is that you, when they initially started the process, they would have, you would get be able to see the first matches for free, be able to see them essentially. But then if you wanted to contact them, there'd be a small fee that they would have, and then you can access more matches associated with their database. So they're trying to increase the Family Tree's DNA databases by having more people join in as well. And what happens is that, you know, there are some people that, let's say, tested Family Tree DNA and have only tested there. There's some people that tested at 23andMe and have only tested there. There's no way of knowing that you're a match unless you're able to get into the same database. Yes, let's get some questions. Yes.
We had ours done with Heritage,
Mm-hmm.
and it pretty much confirmed I was like 80% Scott-Irish and 15% English, but then the remainder of it was Western Asian. Now, from what you're saying, it sounds to me like that to find out why there is a connection there, I would need to do more definitive subtests. Because this, you know, it just doesn't make sense where that Western Asian would possibly come.
How much percentage are they providing you with? Is it less than 10%, less than 3%?
Let's see, it was like 80%, 15%, so it was like 5%.
Okay, we're getting into a very small amount at that point. 5% is still significant enough to want to trace something like that. You might be able to see if it said Western Asian, which would be Eurasian essentially.
Around that area.
Okay, they're considering Western Asian as being part of like the Middle East as well. Yeah, that would be something that with 5% you might find something in your family tree further back you might have to look into. But this is basically, you have certain percentages that are given to you by the different testing companies. You know, are any of these smaller amounts significant, and do you do research on that? The question is that if you have a family tree, you should be able to go far back enough. If you don't see it at their point, it might be further back than you think that you can get to.
One more question for the webinar, please.
Gentleman right there.
What about the security of these?
That's a very good question. That's a very good question. I'm personally not concerned about that because they're not going to clone me. But here's the thing: is that with the information that you see, is there something that there's two answers to that question. The information that you get on your results really can't be used to do anything. There's not enough genetics on there to put into a machine to do anything. The second part is that There, a number of years ago, the YSearch website, ysearch.org, was hacked into. And they used that information in a research type of way to basically look at the Y-DNA for people across the world, and came up with research results on that, even though they took the information supposedly illegally, but the site didn't have enough security. Now a lot of these sites have better security regarding that. Each year, the results that you get back are on a personal page. The only person that has access to that is you, and if you join a project, your administrator or volunteer administrator has access to that, but limited access. They can't change your address, your name, they can't change your results and things like that. So that's the kind of the security. They also have a number of rules regarding ethics and more regarding for the volunteer administrators, so they're not, you know, getting in data and stuff like that, and they're using them for their own purposes. So.
All right, well, let's everybody give Robert a lovely round.